ci jamono jooju la ñu toll te li gënoon ci Gambie fi mu nekk ñuy waxtaanee loolu Halifa Sallah benn nit la dafa dund tey ëllëg mu génn àddina.
waaye xam nga honorable da ngeen toll woon foo xam ne da ngeen jox askan wi jox askan wi yaakaar nit ñi gom li ngeen doon def ñu toog léegi saa su ne ñuy dégg wax depuis bi Yaya Jammeh nekkee foofu Barrow nekk Sénégal am na ko binda bu yàggul mu ne Pa can you ask him to clarify the claim Mai Fatty made when he was in Senegal saying Jammeh stole money and Halifa disagreed did that lead to the division of the coalition depuis jamono jooju la disagreement commencé di am yaag Mai Fatty ñu commencé mu continuer yaag ngam Amat Bah OJ toog fele moom it wax like ku nekk ci yéen there has been an outright division and it's very visible and vivid.
xam nga gis-gis boobu moo leen jaxase carte yi yëpp li bokkul la nit ñi day boole ku nekk xam ne ne ñoom May ci biti lañ nekkoon balaa convention bi di am kooku Halifa Sallah du xëccoo ak moom ñoom xen yëpp ci biti lañu nekkoon balaa coalition bi am mu mel ni ñun bi ñoo tabax xëccoowuñu ak kenn buñ dem ba tabax ba pare yàq ñun li ñu wone man li ma wone ci jamono boobu loolu nekkutoon werante suma diggante ak Mai Fatty loolu dafa nekkoon lu garaaw ndaxte dafa fekk Barrow mu ngi ci biti Jammeh itam dem na soo waxee ne Jammeh dem na ak ay millions jëlee ko ci Central Bank loo foog ne mooy xew mais liggéey ci Central Bank ba mun nañoo yóbbu millions yooya ay soldats mun nañoo dem daanu ca Central Bank ba jël millions yooya dafa fekk ne ñoom xamuñu transition bi naka la war a demee moo tax mu nuroo mel ni werante nekk ci coalition wante man werantoo mu woon ak kenn kàddu gi li ma taxama wax ko mooy pour bu kenn jël loolu dem daanu ca banque ba jël fa dara ndax dafa fekk ne kii di inspecteur general police man maa ngi wax ci turi président bi sant naa ko pour mu dem fu nekk pour gis ne mbooleem mbiri nguur gi arrangé na ko ba gis ne dara yàquwul même ñëw wane ne ña fa nekk ne kenn laalul dara ah bëri boo xam ne dem nga ci ka fa nekk ne dara laaluñu ko xam nga loolu.
Right now, when you buy a new dining table, you'll get any of our dining chairs half price. The delivery is free.
Schweitzer, I'm the director of CHI, and I got to tell you, today hasn't exactly been my typical Thursday, or really my typical Wednesday-Thursday combination, because, and this is one of the really nice perks of the job, we should do this more often, I don't usually get to engage with political and moral leaders of their country, and yesterday and today has been quite amazing in that respect, and so I hope that you'll equally come to appreciate and that maybe admire our distinguished speaker's wisdom. This event, and this is also a little bit different, is one that certainly would not have been possible without the support and assistance of many units and leaders across the campus and the university. And so I'd like to thank the Multicultural Center, the Global Leadership Center, African Studies, the Center for Law, Justice, and Culture, Global Studies, War and Peace, the Departments of History, Political Science, and African American Studies, and the Center for International Studies. And we really have a sort of a tremendously diverse, global engagement-oriented community there that we can bring together around these events. So I would now typically introduce the speaker, but today that honor should go to Professor Grimai Negash, the Director of African Studies.
Hello, thank you, Egon, for the honor. I would like to welcome our distinguished speaker, the Honorable Khalifa Salah. He is a member of parliament and a special advisor to the Gambian president. My name is Girmay Nagash. I am as he said, the director of African studies. I am also a professor of African literature in the Department of English. I am really very delighted to have this honor this is a lecture hosted by the Contemporary History Institute, and we have had collaborations before with Department of History and African Studies, Center of International Studies generally, and I hope this will continue. I would like to express really my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Asan Sar and to you as well, Egon, and the chair of the Department of History, Catherine Jellison. I will say a few words by way of introducing, preparing the ground for Khalifa Salah. But before that, there is a little story I need to tell you, and it's a true story. It's really a true story, and it's related to this event. The historian, I mean, the people who read in Ohio University history and the African community, of course, know about this. But in 2016, this is for those who may not have followed the situation, the former ruler,
Good evening, Uncle Khalifa. After we had the radio version, just as we said, a lot of people are confused right now in the Gambia, and we've seen soldiers stationed all over the country. You're the spokesperson of the coalition. We've just had you on the Paradise FM, and right now we are coming to have the same broadcast on the Mediamatic. We will first ask you, where do the coalition stand, especially when the outgoing president is saying that the results are not correct. He does not recognize anymore the IAC's declaration that is doing. The spokesperson want to know where does we stand right now. And before we start, we want to thank you again for coming this time over 2 hours. Yes. We will first ask you, where do the coalition stand, especially when outgoing president is saying that
Halo Jawo.
Oh, jarang.
Jarang. Tanah lah.
Jam tadi.
brilliant.
Wodi squeeze sudu biddo am guy later don ko misiko konyo fo hawri ko sukabe.
Right, I see. Anyway, just for your information, you are live.
Okay.
On Facebook. Yeah.
Hello.
Right. It looks like device matter on a manina. You put it on loud. You have another device on loud. Right, I see. Anyway, just for your live. Okay. On Facebook. Yeah. Are you listening on another device? Right. It looks like device matter on a manina. You put it on loud. You have another device on loud. Right.
I don't have another one that is on Facebook.
Right. Ala earphone or well, the sound is coming back here, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Are you listening on another device?
No, I'm not. The only device I have here is my phone, which I've put off.
Well, there is this funny noise coming from the background.
What happened when you restarted then?
Restarting is going to be something difficult. So now what I will do is I will drop you. Okay. That sounds better now. Let me see and bring you back in. Yes, problem is coming from your end. Restarting is going to be something difficult. So now.
Constitute the first building block into the future. It comes at a time when the government has fully taken over and is...
Hello, Jawo?
Hello?
Right, you can hear me now. Okay, it looks like problem where you hit out.
Yeah. We are.
Right.
Whatever limitations the...
Okay, so we'll make a start as soon as possible. Let me just do one or two things. Right, you can hear me now. Okay. I think I don't know how you how you need to sort this out, because what is happening is mid-ohala, but it is echoing from your end. Okay, so
Sulema, I don't know where it's coming from actually.
I think it is a speaker from your end. I think I don't know how you need to sort this out. Ala earphone. Mid-ohala, but it is echoing from your end. Okay, so
It's still echoing.
Sulema,
I don't know where it's coming from actually. Okay, hold on for me.
I think it is a speaker from your end. I don't know how you need to will do is I've just dropped him and let him sort it out. Hello, viewers. Good evening, and welcome to this perspective. As usual, we will have a substantial discussion on issues, really not the politics you're currently seeing in cyberspace, pretty much occupied with the UDP versus Barrow, what looks like to be a real power struggle for tiny little Gambia. Jawo is back. Let me see if I can bring him in again. In cyberspace. Hello, Jawo.
Hello, Mauro.
Bumani Maro is still echoing. I think it is the speaker of your either a computer or a laptop you're using, or tiny little Gambia. I am hearing myself.
Yeah, I can hear you too repeating. I don't know where it's coming from.
Definitely it's coming from your device. If you have a speaker, I think you need to mute the speaker. Tiny little Gambia. I am hearing myself.
I can hear you too repeating. I don't know where it's coming from.
Definitely it's coming from your device. If you have a speaker, I think you need to mute the speaker. Tiny little Gambia. I am hearing myself. Right, I have dropped Jawo again. Unfortunately, it's not been a very good experience for the past 2 episodes. My feelings, okay, from okay, abarka, for the only for a ballet. For the say can for a ballet. Well, Jawo is gone again. Okay, viewers, what I will do is I will just let you go with Khalifa's contribution in the National Assembly.
Whatever achievements we need to register. Honorable Speaker, at bullet point 1.5, the President of the Republic enjoins us to work together.
Well, I believe
amicably,
those of you who are with us
and purposefully
would really
of the nation and humanity at large. It is important
would really get the benefit of tonight's discussion.
That this administration has started with a national development plan, which took over a year to formulate and narrate. But the reality must be underscored.
you hear me? This is proving
right. Jawo, how is it now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Wonderful. I believe whatever was echoing has gone now.
I restarted the laptop. I don't know what was happening, so I think it's gone now. We can go ahead.
Right. Okay. Right. So like I was saying, good evening to the viewers. Welcome to this episode of the Doi Perspective. I am your host, Suleiman Bokarba, and tonight our honorable guest is Mr. Abdoulie Jawo, a Gambian and international developmental worker based in Bradford. But more so, perhaps he will tell you about his political inclination tonight. Maybe I may not be allowed to do so. But Jawo, welcome, and feel free to introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you very much, Suleiman, for inviting me onto this forum, which is a really very good initiative for the party. You're doing a really very good job. Like you indicated, my name is Abdoulie Jawo. I work in international development, which I started back in the Gambia, where I worked with one of the leading international non-governmental organizations for some 17 years before I left to work in Malawi. Then left there to come to UK to do my master's at Bradford University. Completed that in December 2007 and started work with an NGO in London, focusing on fundraising for their East Africa program. And
Wonderful.
since then, I've been in and out of the United Kingdom, worked in different countries, in Tanzania. I've also worked in Kenya. Currently, I'm working in London, but like you said, I have other relations in Bradford, where I also frequent, but I'm mainly based in London, where I work with another charity, which currently focuses on peace building and conflict resolution. I will not name names, but I work there as a funding and program development manager for that NGO.
Right. Wonderful. That's an admirable credentials. Obviously, most of us, the young people, would really like to or love to have such an achievement as far as international development work and networking is concerned. But before we get into our main topic of discussion tonight, Jawo, we'll briefly look at the current affairs in the Gambia right now, because like I always say, that is what provide or kind of makes our discussion a bit spicy. What is happening right now in the Gambia, it's Barrow versus the UDP in their own ways, and what I considered as a power struggle. Barrow had a massive meeting in Brikama, and today the UDP are in Brufut. But so far, for me, I did not see any difference. I mean, it's what I hear and saw is a replica of similar rhetorics, the unending greetings to those who are sitting on the villages, and then throw daggers at each other, that we will uproot you, you know, this particular individual is our leader, he will be the president. That is it. No policy or program discussions. Isn't this not a concern to you as a Gambian?
Well, I think it should be a concern to every Gambian. That is precisely one of the challenges of politics in the country, where politics, conversation on politics, political campaigns, and political alliances are not strongly based and rooted on policies and programs of what the party that one wants to support or that one is supporting espouses. I think the difference there, not that I'm a supporter of DOI, but I think every objective and so any person who is really objective in terms of his or her political views would understand that DOI is the party that has clear policies and programs. I think what is currently happening in the country is really very unfortunate, because the transition program, as everyone knows, should have been based on establishing a level playing field for political activity in the country, ensuring legal reforms where bad laws which were enacted during the past 22 years should be repealed and replaced with more progressive laws. There is a whole lot to draw from experiences of other countries which have undergone more difficult circumstances than the Gambia. You have countries such as the Rwandas and other places where there was conflict. And those countries have come up with legislative frameworks which have empowered citizens and which have led to economic development of their country. So what is happening currently is really very unfortunate, because the focus should have been on those fundamental areas in terms of political leveling the political playing field, political reforms, electoral reforms, legislative reforms. That is happening to some extent given the CRC and other initiatives, but I think have been less of what was expected by the Gambian people when the coalition was voted in. I think currently the Gambian voter, the Gambian citizen, should reevaluate his or her position in terms of what is happening, so that no Gambian becomes a pawn in that political game. Gambians should move out of that, given the experiences during the past 22 years. We've seen how people were being mobilized to support APRC, for example, the party at the time. Gambians should move from that. The important point is, if politicians come, the discussion should be based on how are you going to govern this country. We have over $20 billion annual budget a year. How are you going to use those resources to uplift me and my family and my community from poverty? Anything sort of such conversation, Gambians should pay little heed to that.
But again, I think Barrow, as a transitional leader in this case, he is taxed and he has a bigger role to play in terms of laying the foundation for genuine democratic practices in the country. But as far as my opinion of Barrow is concerned here, I think he's been disingenuous to all Gambians, I would say all progressive Gambians, because he was taxed to put the country on the right democratic footing. And he has undertaken a contract with the Gambians, which to me is a democratic obligation that needs to be fulfilled. He has undertaken a commitment which he must deliver. But no, he's not thinking that way right now. He is heavily indoctrinated with the Mansaya syndrome right now that has overtly taken over his thinking. And at all cost, he wants to pursue it, which really is not what the Gambia deserve, and it's not what the people of the country deserve. Like you've stated, the country is faced with all these challenges that you have elucidated on. But more so, it is faced with democratic and ecological challenges. Right now, degradation is everywhere. Infrastructure looks so off. Here and there you have land crisis going on, mining going on, massive exploitation of our ecology going on. I think Barrow has a role to play rather than the polemics that is going on around the country between him and the UDP. But I'll just let you have a final say on that, and then we'll get into our main issues of discussion tonight.
Yeah, I think, like I indicated, it's a huge disappointment of enormous proportions in terms of what the expectations of the coalition were and how things ended up panning out. I think that's on all areas, basically, because the transition program was not supposed to be development focus in terms of the alleviation of poverty in the country. If anything was to be active during the 3 years that was agreed on that, in terms of uplifting people out of poverty, that would have been a tremendous achievement. The focus was to be on those reforms that I mentioned, to enlarge the democratic space in the country. So issues that are currently happening in terms of mining, where it's taking place, we don't know how much is generated. There are ecological issues. The role of Barrow here is basically very fundamental, because he assumed the role of an executive president. And as an executive president, the buck stops with him, basically, in terms of what is happening. I think what I am trying to avoid is direct conversations in terms of what is happening between UDP and Barrow, because that's ultimately for the Gambian people to decide when it comes to elections. The behavior, actions, and orientations of a politician or a political party should be gauged and decided upon by the Gambian voters. So it's the Gambian voters to evaluate the actions, policies, if there are any, programs, again, if there are any clear programs, behaviors and utterances of any and every politician, and make their decisions, mature decisions, based on those observations and based on their experiences with that political dispensation as is currently obtained in the case of Barrow, and the utterances and behaviors of any other political party in the country. I think that is one of the factors that seem not to be a defining criterion in terms of the election of political leaders. But once Gambian voters attain that level of political engagement, that level of evaluating and making decisions based on experiences that would contribute to their development, or that may hinder the development of their communities, the development of the country, then Gambia would be seen to have moved a huge step forward. The elections in December 2019 2016 has been a historic one, because being engaged in political discourses, having a political party that I was supporting, the perspective, the views of some people was that a sitting president cannot be defeated through the ballot box. And my experience at the time, being involved in the election process on the day of the elections, observing elections, for me, I think the room was there from the very beginning in 1996 for the APRC to be defeated. If the Gambian people had come together at the time, which at that time was obviously difficult, but subsequently, I think the efforts made by one political party or one politician or the other should have galvanized other political parties to come together. Because the electoral process, some people are saying there was electoral rigging, election rigging, and so on and so forth. Well, I did not see that.
I think just to interrupt you there, because obviously, if one want to discuss what really has happened from 1996 to date, you spend the whole night talking about it, because there are so many abnormalities and failures on the part of the opposition. And when I say the opposition, I don't mean all, because I don't believe in that theory of collective indictment, because that means you really be offensive to others who made all efforts in good faith. But something you've mentioned, that Gambians, whether they have that level of political engagement to be able to decide based on informed choices. I think this is where I am faulting the elites, because knowing fully well that this is a community or a society of massive illiteracy, and they are using that as a tool against them.
Suleiman, can you hold on? There is some background comment here. Let me just address that quickly.
Right, quickly. I will just bring in Lamin Fati from Germany. Hello, Lamin. Hello, Lamin. Hello, Lamin. Well, it looks like Lamin's network is terribly poor. Yes, Jawo. So like what I was saying, I think these elites, they are deliberately playing with the minds of the Gambian people, knowing very well that this is a community. One would not call it a theocratic state, but our culture is so infused with religious beliefs to the extent that they will think that these elites are put there by God. And that is a fatalistic misconception that would take time to get rid of it. And these major political players, they really have a role to change these mindsets, but they are not doing so. And I think that is where I find it very difficult and very intolerant to the leaders and these political elites. But like I said, we will get to our main topic of discussion tonight, which is the Constitutional Review Commission. You and Lamin Fati have both submitted position papers, or I would say presented your ideas that you have designed in a position paper to the CRC to take those issues into consideration in writing a new constitution. But here, for me, before even getting into those details, I personally believe, although this was an opportunity for some of you Gambians and abroad to face the commission and then put your ideas before them, but I believe this is a complete waste of taxpayers' monies and then extravaganza, flying from one destination to another. On doing a consultation that really could have been done in this digital age and era. I mean, what's the point? All these ideas that you're soliciting from Gambians in the diaspora, you can easily get them while on the ground in this digital age. For me, it's really unnecessary, absolutely unnecessary. I would like to get your take on this before we look at your ideas.
All right, thank you. Thanks very much, Suleiman. Just to go back in terms of the efforts that were made to bring change in the country. I think my statement is to the fact that there were political parties or political players that were making that effort to galvanize other political parties, bring other political parties together. So it's not a blanket statement that nothing was being done. Obviously, we know what was being done from, for example, the 2001 elections before that period, going forward. So clear.
Right.
I think the issue of elitism is something that, in my own view, might be misleading, where one would think that there is an elite that exists and that should be responsible of educating the people or enlightening the people. Yes, that might be the case, but the fact is that every Gambian of mature age should know what is good for him or herself, what is good for his or her family, his or her community. And it is based on that one should be able to make decisions. And this shouldn't be short-term decisions. One should look at longer-term decisions, where immediate benefits should not define future for 5 years, for example. So I think that is very important. Coming back to the Constitutional Review Commission, the CRC, which is the topic of conversation today. The CRC has two major tasks. One, according to the CRC Act of 2017, Section 6 of that Act, the CRC is to draft a new constitution. It should come up with a new constitution. And it should prepare a report in relation to that constitution. And in doing so, it is mandated to carry out its functions by seeking public opinion and take into account such proposals as it deemed appropriate. Therefore, it's important for the Commission to consult with Gambians. And the meeting that was held in London, I think people may have different views in terms of the value for money element in it. Value for money here meaning the amount of expenditure made and the result of that expenditure, the value of that expenditure. I would not be in a position to make that judgment or to make a commentary on that. What I can talk about is the experiences that I've had at that meeting in London, where I went to participate. In my own observation, I think the quality of the contributions was really, really good. And the commitment of the people, although the meeting was supposed to start at 12 p.m., but it started around 1. I understand that the commissioners were there at 11:30. So 30 minutes before the scheduled time, according to the chairperson, they were already at the venue. But the number of participants, the critical mass was not realized early enough for the meeting to start. But when it started, it went on up to some minutes to 10 o'clock. It was going on 10 p.m. So for me, that also shows the commitment of Gambians to sit for all that period, like for almost 9 hours, making contributions towards one of the fundamental documents of the country, which is a constitution. I think that was a huge commitment. And that speaks really good. It speaks really well of the diaspora in terms of their wanting to be engaged politically in the affairs of how our country, the Gambia, is being governed. How our country, the Gambia, the political leaders are being selected, and their participation in the electoral process in the Gambia, in the governance process in the Gambia. So in short, in terms of whether it's a waste of taxpayers' money or so, well, I wouldn't put it that way. What I would say is that the level of engagement and the quality of the engagement at that meeting was really very, very good.
Right. Wonderful. And then here we get to your salient points that you have put before the Constitutional Review Commission, which is ranging from party funding to equality, inclusiveness, and the need for a quota system. On the party funding, your argument was on transparency and accountability. Could you provide context to us here?
You know, that's one of the important points for having a level playing field for political parties, where the support base of a political party would also be a contributing factor towards the financing of that party. Because we understand in the Gambia, it's Gambian citizens who are allowed to donate to political parties. And my contribution there shouldn't be only any Gambian, it should be Gambians who are in the electoral register. They should be the ones who can donate to a political party. In terms of the donation, the transparency there is very important, because we would not want to have a political party that is receiving money from sources that are not known. So the transparency is very important, because that would also contribute towards ensuring that the Gambian people contributing towards a political party is the basis for the financial development of that political party, and not from any sources that may have other implications in terms of when that political party comes into office, how it governs the country. So the transparency is important. The other thing is for a cap to be established, where one can contribute up to a certain level. Like in UK, you have that after the Ono scandal was exposed, where rich people were contributing money to a given political party, so as to be given honors during the honors distribution in the country. So those are some of the things that need to be considered, because currently you have political parties or entities buying all sorts of mobility items. Where is that money coming from? You have a political party for the past 22 years, for example, not being able to do things that they are doing now. Where is that money coming from? You have the current transition leader, Barrow, doing things when we all know that, you know, as a Gambian, he was struggling like everyone else. Where is that funding coming from? Because apparently what is happening is building up his political base. But where is that funding coming from? So essentially, my contribution there was to ensure transparency, was to ensure that there is a cap, and it's only Gambians who should be allowed legally to contribute to the financing of a political party. Anything outside of that should be a criminal offense and should be taken as a legal matter by the country. And the IEC should publish donations made by individual Gambians to political parties. Like here is published on the Electoral Authority's website, where you go there, you know who is contributing how much to which party. That ensures transparency. Yeah. At the end of the day, if you calculate that, you're able to know how much the party has generated. And is that commensurate with all the hundreds of motorcycles that are being bought by the party? Is it commensurate with all the things that the party is doing, for example? So those are some of the things that need to be taken into consideration, because there is a huge inequality in terms of sources of funding, some of which are not very clear. But as long as it continues and the Gambian people's mentality in terms of having immediate benefits on political engagement would be very difficult to have a level playing field in the country.
Absolutely. And I think those are some of the issues that most recently here in the UK, Nigel Farage was confronted with. But again, these are best standards of practices. And again, I would say this, our political actors, they are so fatalistic to our democracy that they are not thinking about the future. They are not working towards the future, whereby you don't need all this political rendezvous, materialistic politics, and slaves in our elections. But they are not doing anything to stop it. And they know very well that this is not something that is going to last. Obviously, generations after generation, our democratic culture will change, and it must change for the good. But taking reference from the Western models of democratic practices here, you wouldn't see that here. You wouldn't see a political party buying a bicycle for its supporters. Go and do this and do that. That's the level of their political maturity and their democratic culture. So from our own perspective, we should also start working towards that. And it is the best standard of practice, really, rather than inundating from Banjul to Basse with motorbikes like your, what would I say, running in Abuja or in Lagos.
Yeah, I think the issue of having assets for a political party is not the issue.
That's not the issue.
Because political parties would have assets that would enhance their ability to win voters. And that includes mobility. But the issue is, where is the funding for that coming from? That is the fundamental point that needs to be looked at. And in doing so, legal mechanisms need to be established in the Constitution, and any relevant subsidiary law in the country where people who are mandated to manage electoral processes would also be mandated to look into party political financing. As long as there is no legislative provision for that, then that loophole would continue to exist. But if those mandated to manage electoral processes are also legally mandated to look into party political financing to ensure that there are no dubious sources of funding of political parties, then they will be able to do
Jawo, not to interrupt you, but when it comes to dubious funding of in our political process, that is absolutely evident. We have had the case of the 53 pickups, and no genuine reason or explanation is still not been given. And that is to the highest level of state hierarchy. So who are we? But again, coming back to the relevance of your point, that is having that legal and regulatory framework properly designed to make sure that we have genuine democratic cultural practices as far as party fundings are concerned. In case if you did not exhaust that point, I'll allow you to make your final points on that, and then we can move to your next item of submission to the CRC.
Yeah, I think that is more or less covered. It depends on whether the CRC would incorporate that in the Constitution, and whether if it is incorporated, it would continue to exist in the Constitution. Because after the submission of the report, the draft Constitution would undergo several processes, which includes involvement of the National Assembly. But my understanding is that the CRC should be able to publish the draft Constitution that it hands over to the president.
Wonderful.
So the Gambian people would be able to scrutinize what has been submitted to the president, and subsequently, if there are any significant changes, any retrogressive changes that have been made, the Gambian people would be able to identify that and make a judgment on that, why that is happening. Because we know the CRC during the transition period, during the junta, there were issues that some provisions might have or were tampered with. We don't have evidence for that, but that was this a point that was raised at the time. But I think the issue of transparency is important in order to avoid rumors and hearsay. Because if what is submitted, everybody have access to it. If there is any change, then we would know. If it continues and there are also improvement on it, then we would know that these are genuine contributions from the executive and from the National Assembly.
They really have a fundamental task to frame all progressive democratic values in our new instrument of constitution that will serve us and serve the future generation. Next on your item of submission was on fundamental human rights, and specifically your contention was the right to education, and I will allow you to discuss that. But before that, it's really something very significant, the right to education and health and environment. Like I said in the beginning, the Gambia is also faced with ecological challenges. And if you ask me today, one of the most urgent issues the country needs to look at is ecological challenges. It's really devastating how the environment is right in the Gambia. But again, you can go ahead with your next item of discussion, which is the right to education.
That was a conversation because the discussion at the London CRC consultation, there were 14 main areas that were discussed. And in terms of education, social services, that was discussed under fundamental rights and freedoms. The three main areas that were covered, I think because of time limitation, were education, environment, and health. Whether it should be legally binding on the Gambian state to provide those three social services. Free, is it going to be on a fee basis, and so on and so forth. We understand, for example, in terms of environment, governments have come up with mechanisms. Even the air that you breathe is being analyzed to ensure that it doesn't have any pathogens or any harmful matter that would harm the human person in that country. All those have become fundamental rights of people. Is that something that we are looking for in the Gambia, where we have factories doing things that are damaging our environment, and nothing is happening about that? But like I indicated at that meeting, it's important for the developing country like the Gambia to adopt best practice, irrespective of where that best practice comes from. That is what is going to pull us out of the situation that we are in. And we should also be innovative in our own way to ensure that any practice that is being adopted or any practice that is being initiated is addressing the real needs of the Gambian people. When one looks at the issue of fundamental rights and freedoms, I think that has been a debate that was going on for a very long time. Some political analysts or sociologists would question its relevance at the time, where some people were emphasizing more on political rights, others were thinking of more on social rights, social, cultural, and economic rights. But I think that debate has died down, that the human person, as I indicated at that at the meeting, the rights of an individual goes beyond the integrity of the physical integrity of the human being. The human being needs education to be able to be positioned to contribute to his or her country. And it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that every citizen in that country has equal access to education. And where finance, where tuition fees becomes a barrier to some people to be able to access education, then their fundamental rights are being denied. And when we talk about rights, the issue of doing things halfway and then leaving it there. When, for example, when you talk about basic education or education up to secondary level, what would that genuinely benefit to a Gambian? How competitive would that person be in the labor market? What competencies, what skills would that instill on the Gambian to be able to be a significant contributor to the socio-economic development of the country? I'm not saying that university education alone is the solution, but I'm saying is that each person should have the opportunity to be able to pursue education up to that level. If you do not want to do it, then it's your own thing. But the government should put up mechanisms where people should be able to pursue education up to the highest level. We've seen some countries where this was free, from kindergarten up to university level. And if the resources of the country are well managed, obviously it's something that could be done. But I think at that meeting, a number of people were saying, well, the government cannot afford it. And my position was, if the government can't afford it, then we have countries like here, for example, in UK or in US, where they come up with mechanisms where people would access funding. And when they start working, then they would be paying gradually. So all those things are things that need to be looked at. The important point is, when there is no equal opportunity, then there isn't equality in society. That's the fundamental point in terms of fundamental rights and freedoms, because it's not only the ability to be able to hold processions, the ability to have political views, to air those political views when you're not able to change this situation. But the opportunity to change your financial and economic circumstances is important. And that should be a fundamental right of every Gambian.
That's absolutely right. Like even in the 1997 Constitution, the right to education is being provided for, but it's not been delivered by the government. Like you said, the argument could be, okay, they don't have the capacity. But again, in the country's international undertakings and international obligations, they have accepted to deliver some of these basic fundamental human rights. But like you've observed, it's not really happening in the Gambia. But we hope so that in the new constitution, these rights will not only be provided by the constitution, but it would be delivered by any ruling government or by the state at large. Just to move on, because obviously time is not on our side and it's getting late. Briefly, citizenship has also been a contentious issue. You must have had a position on citizenship. What was your position on that?
I think in terms of citizenship, the position of the CRC is that the progressive provisions in the 1997 Constitution continuing. What they are is in terms of how what obtains is going to be improved. For example, there were questions as to whether if one stays longevity of staying in the Gambia, which is 15 years, whether that is something that should be shortened. People have different views in terms of the nature and the type of citizenship that one could get, the process or the duration of getting that. I think in that area, I did not make any direct contribution towards that. But one of the things that was ringing in my mind is in terms of citizenship being a fundamental human right. And what obtains in the Gambia is you have people, citizenship being maliciously or deliberately being questioned. You wouldn't question somebody to access education, for example, or to go to a health center and access health services. Why would one question one citizenship, for instance, and being put under some strenuous experiences? I think that is something that needs to be looked at. In some countries, it should be a legal offense. In the Gambia too, it should be a legal offense for one citizen to deliberately and maliciously question the citizenship of a fellow citizen.
Yeah, deliberately discriminating individuals on the basis of citizenship. And again, if you look at the country as a whole, it is a country we are proud of, but it is not a country who wants to desperately die for to get citizenship because the country hasn't got to that level of development. I mean, but that's just a silly comment there. But like you say,
yeah, I know. But if you look at the Gambian passport, is one of the most valuable travel documents, irrespective of the status of development of the country, because it has been known to be peaceful. Gambia has been known to be peaceful despite the 22 years of trauma. So that also counts a lot in terms of travel compared to other countries in that region. So it's still really very, very, very valuable document internationally.
Well, Gambians as a whole really need some orientation on citizenship itself, because most Gambians, I would say, still don't know the value of citizenship. As a matter of fact, like you said, well, for some hyper local champions will jump around and say, you know what, you are not a Gambian here and there, trying to discriminate others. And precisely to our African brothers from Guinea-Conakry, they face this a lot in the Gambia. And here and there, you see the immigration chasing them, running like chasing a thief, really. This happens in the Gambia, and I've witnessed that. It's so unfortunate. But like you said, I believe your contention is to have that robust legal framework that clearly defines on the route to citizenship, and also not make it just necessarily difficult. But look, for instance, some of us living in the diaspora here, we don't face a lot of challenges when it comes to applying for citizenship. For instance, in the UK here, most likely after having your indefinite leave to remain, if you did not break any immigration law, you could quickly get your citizenship within a period of 6 years, and many times a maximum of 10 years if you have broken an immigration law before. But again, these are all issues that clearly needs to be defined and then outlined. I have heard about a case of someone applying for a passport in the Gambia, and he was told that he is not a citizen. Actually, the father was a Gambian, the mother is a Gambian. Just because this particular individual has been living in Casamas, he applied and he was asked where he was living, and he said Casamas. Just because of that, he's been denied for citizenship. Here also, I would assume that in respect to standards of best practices, if you're refusing someone for citizenship, you must clearly outline that in written black and white document and ground it on legal basis, not just say, no, we cannot issue this because you are not a citizen. That blanket way of denying people the right to citizenship, I think is really unacceptable. I hope the CRC will deal with some of those issues. Now,
yeah, I think in terms of that is an age-old challenge. The competition between tradition and custom and legislation. That is a challenge which the new constitution is also going to continue to face. But the important point is that legislation has to be implemented, and the processes and procedures have to be clearly laid out. That's why a legislation is issued. Then there are regulations in terms of just expanding on how it is going to be implemented, and the framework, the mechanisms that need to be put in place in its implementation. If you look at the Gambia, for example, acquiring citizenship, the decentralization is not very clear in terms of where one needs to go. The process of getting that is, for example, staying there for 15 years. You have people who have stayed much longer than that, but they don't even know how to acquire citizenship. So all those are things that need to be looked at in terms of the implementation of legislation. One is that people should know what the law says, and that civic education needs to be carried out. But unfortunately, in a lot of African contexts and some Asian contexts as well, because I work with Asian countries, the issue of civic education is seen as a political entity instead of the raising of the consciousness of a citizenry, which every government should take as its responsibility. But that is something that is not well pronounced in terms of just enabling people to understand what the process is and what the procedures are in terms of how to acquire that citizenship if one has been in the Gambia for that duration of time, or if one is claiming citizenship through ancestry and so on and so forth.
Right. That's well noted. So quickly, and some of the salient points that were raised there has to do with the IEC's chairperson's term or tenure in office.
Yeah, I think that what is provided currently is that the seven-year term. So the commissioners took turns. CRC commissioners took turns in terms of making presentations on one area or the other, and they would ask questions around that. One of the some of the questions were whether it should remain as it is, or whether it needs to be shortened, whether it needs to be put in a different way, and people made different contributions. One of which, for example, was like 4-5 year, 2-5 year term. Others will say it should be less than that, and it should not be in line with the term of the executive, where you have 5 years, and at the end of those 5 years, the IEC chairperson's term also covers those 5 years. So there were different positions on that. I think one of the other challenges for the CRC is how those divergent views, different opinions, are going to be reflected in the new constitution, where there is no unanimous agreement that, for example, if you talk about the IEC chairperson's term at that meeting, and I think it might be the case in other meetings, how would they scientifically come up with a decision or a recommendation on that? I'm sure they would work that out as legal minds.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So,
the two salient, I would say, very fundamental points that really needs to be considered in its new constitution is the principle of absolute majority and then gifts. This, I believe, really needs robust provisions to provide for absolute majority. This is a democratic principle that is really valued in most democracies around the world. For instance, if you look at the margin between Jammeh and the coalition, and if you look at the percentage that put Adama Barrow in office, it really is the percentage of the minority, if you take into consideration of what the APRC and the GDC got. So I think it would really be important to incorporate that principle into the new constitution for adequate and representation. What is your take on that, Jawo?
Yeah, I think, this 1997 constitution, it was provided for, and I think the APRC decided to remove it because one of the elections, I think, was in 2001, where they got 50-something% of the vote. So that created some scary moment for the APRC, and decided just to make it simple majority. So I think getting that back, there is unanimous agreement on that, as far as I understand, at that meeting. The issue of the coalition winning Jammeh, because sometimes you think you will change a law to your advantage, but at the end of the day, it might end up being to your detriment.
Yeah.
And that's precisely what happened for the APRC. So it's something that they thought would be a mechanism that would continue to perpetuate the APRC in power. And unfortunately, it did not. It backfired on them, and really very well for the Gambian people.
Right. That's true. And then, Jawo, from the onset, we have seen when President Barrow came into power, he went to Dakar, and then a particular businessman gave him I believe it's a compound there. Presumably, he accepted that gift, which is different from other gifts that have really surfaced along the way. I think this is one way of how all these leaders get riches in office, which a Democrat would argue, if they were not in office, I wouldn't say even a Democrat would argue, but just using right logical reasoning, one would say that they would not get such gifts if they were that ordinary layman in the streets there. So they are getting it because they are occupying the highest place of the land. And in other words, that particular gift belong to those people, not him as an individual. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think the issue of Barrow receiving gifts, I wouldn't go into details on that because I have not seen the evidence. Is people saying that has happened, which obviously speaks to what needs to happen, what needs to be provided for legislatively. Because a wrong has to be backed by a remedy. and a remedy has to be based on the power to investigate, investigative powers. In UK here, there is a specific act on investigation. How the police or other law enforcement entities should be empowered to investigate issues. So when one speaks about wrongdoing or alleged wrongdoing, and in this instance, the receiving of gifts, my point on that was that gifts should be declared, which was the position, I think, of many people at that meeting. But I went further and asked, if gifts are declared, then what next? Because the fundamental point should not be the declaration, but what next? And looking at best practice in other places, in this country where I have looked at several laws for one reason or the other, is that civil servants receiving gifts, there is a threshold above which that gift becomes state property. I think there are people who have not seen that, but from conversations from people, some are saying is about £200. Above that, although I've not seen it provided in writing, this is based on conversations with friends. Above £200, according to those sources, that gift becomes state property. And if one wants the gift, whether it's a watch or anything, if one wants it, then one would buy it based on the value that has been established on that gift.
Right.
The point here is that as a civil servant, as a public servant, and I think the discussion there was also around political representatives, the president, members of parliament, and for me, it should be for all public servants, and I made that point. The issue of receiving gifts, transparency around that should be for all public servants. Anybody who is paid, as I put it there, from the consolidated fund should be subjected to that. In the UK, if one is engaged in such things, it's seen as bribery. If one is soliciting gifts or accepting gifts, and they don't only call it gifts. They looked at benefits. They call it gifts, benefits, and hospitality. As in Gambia, we say taranga. Even that taranga could be a criminal offense if it goes beyond a certain level. So all those things need to be provided for. And in the country, in UK here, there is the Anti-Bribery Act of 2010, and it provides for gifts, it provides for benefits, and it provides for hospitality. Where if one does things in a given way, one could be found foul of the Anti-Bribery Act. The point there is that public servants are being paid by the state. By virtue of receiving gifts from other people, would one owe some allegiance to those people? Would one have conflict of interest when the interests of those people are being considered, for example? So that's why it's important to have transparency around that. And I think establishing a threshold and making it an offense not to declare gifts should also be looked at. Where, for example, if we have an anti-corruption commission, should be mandated to make investigations of allegations of XYZ receiving gifts and not declaring them. In this case, where there are allegations that Barrow has received gifts and so on and so forth, or any other political leader, that anti-corruption commission should be mandated to make investigations around that and establish the truth. And if the truth is established that that person is found wanting, then if there is an anti-corruption law or any law that one might have been found foul of, so take its course. So the investigative, the legal frameworks are important, but their implementation in terms of empowering certain entities in the country to to implement those laws and to ensure that those laws are implemented through investigative powers and other means of enforcing legislation should be put in place. So that's what I meant when I say tradition and custom and legislation. Right. Because legislation would be at a certain level, but the ability to implement, to have processes, systems, and procedures to ensure that what is enshrined in law is realized in reality becomes a challenge.
Right. Wonderful. I mean, Jawo, we've got about 4 more minutes to the end of this program. There are 2 more important salient points, which is executives getting into business and creating foundations, and then alcalos and governors, chiefs. What is your position on those issues as far as the new constitution is concerned?
Yeah, so like I put it in terms of the president or president's family establishing foundations, I think is a big joke, is a mockery of democracy, is a mockery of our economic system, is a mockery of transparency and accountability in the Gambia, where we have an individual who was struggling like everyone else. But once that person is entrusted with $27 billion annually, that person is able to establish those businesses or those foundations. One being in that position of authority where one could be receiving all types of things, for example, benefits and so on. One is able to establish such things. I think is a huge mockery to our democracy and to our representative system in the Gambia, to overall accountability and transparency in the governance of the country. So that should be scrapped and should be made an offense for the president and his or her family members to be engaged on those things. There should be that clarity, because currently you have, for example, in a country where you have the spouse of a president who was struggling like everyone else, but is now able to go around dishing out gifts, dishing out food and other gifts to hospitals, to people in workplaces and so on. I think is just absolute mockery in terms of how our economy is being managed by the executive. It should be scrapped. No foundations, no business by the executive. That lesson should have been learned from Jammeh. Where is the Jammeh Foundation? It's gone. You have the biggest foundation in the country. You have the national coffers to run. Why do you need a foundation for? Focus on that. That's what people have elected you for. Manage that for the people. People don't want you to be established in any foundation. That's not why you've been put in office. You have 27 billion to manage. Manage that. That is your responsibility. Anything outside of that, economically, should be sanctioned.
In short, there must be a clearly defined legal provision to forbid the president and his family from establishing such foundations once they get into office.
That's what should be provided in the constitution or any subsidiary law from the constitution, because the constitution is a framework from which other legislative provisions should be drawn from. Legislative provisions should be drawn from. But having it in the constitution would be really, really good.
Right, wonderful. So we have really run out of time right now. It is 10:30 here.
Yes.
Usually I wouldn't want to go beyond 1 hour 30 minutes. I would have loved you to make a closing remark, except if you want to quickly deal with the issue of chiefs, governors, and alcalos.
Yes, I think the other important point that was discussed was the 2-term limit. So a lot of people are saying it should be 5-year 2-term limit. My point was 4-year 2-term limit. And the commissioner who made that presentation asked whether it should be consecutive or it could be disjointed, the Putin style of going out and coming back. My point was 4-year term, 8 years, whether it is consecutive or whether there is a gap in between, it doesn't matter. The total should be 8 years and that's it. You are done in terms of serving the country. You go and do something else and somebody takes over. That would eliminate the perpetuation of oneself in power. The electoral cycle was also discussed, whether it should be all done in one day. The presidential, parliamentary, and the council elections. My position was that it should be done in one day, also considering the fact that there is huge voter apathy in the country. And then you having frequent elections, which may also be contributing towards that voter apathy. Although there is no scientific proof on that, but one can deduce on something around that. So as a result, having it one day would be important and also might reduce costs, as others put it. The issue of governors, chiefs, and heads of villages or alcalos was also discussed in terms of whether they should be elected, whether they should be involved in politics, and whether there should be a law to bar them from being involved in politics, which would be difficult because that is a fundamental right of every Gambian to be involved in politics. But the issue is what type of politics and to what end. That's the important point. Others, I think a number of people looked at the position of the alcalo not to be an elective position. Some perspectives were presented on that. But just to summarize, my own view was that those positions, governor, chief, and head of village or alcalo, they should be integrated into the local government system of the country, where we have parallel structures. You have the local government, and then you have this other system. What they're doing in terms of delivering services to the Gambia, well, that's something else. But if they are integrated into the local government system, then there wouldn't be any duplicative structures at that level. So, for instance, you have the governor who would then be the chairperson of the council or the mayor. You have the chief. That position should be integrated into the position of district development chairperson, if anything like that exists or it should exist. And at village level, the head of village should be integrated with the position of village development committee chairperson. I've done some research around local governance when I started an educational program which was supposed to be at PhD level, doing research, for example, in countries like Tanzania, Kenya. Although Kenya has a different structure, but Tanzania has such a structure where the head of the village is synonymous to the chairperson of the village development committee, and it goes on. Although we understand that with Nyerere's orientation in terms of socialist approach to development, he came up with other types of structures. And my other contribution in terms of the chiefs, where they have administrative responsibility and also judicial or quasi-judicial responsibility, that should be scrapped. Right. And if they are integrated into the local government structure, then that goes away, because you can't have an administrator also being a job. That doesn't speak well. There are also discussions around inclusiveness and ensuring equality, gender equality, inclusiveness of people who have disabilities, and so on. And I think you mentioned that initially, where people are talking about having quotas in representative positions. where women would have a quota at National Assembly, local government, and people with disabilities and youth would also have such a thing. And my position was that it should go beyond the quota system. There should be a deliberate effort to encourage affirmative action in the country, where by virtue of someone being disabled, for example, in UK, disability is one of the 9 protected characteristics in the country. Where, for example, if you are inviting people to an interview, you have an obligation legally to give instructions in the event that, or to ask whether the person is disabled or not. Because there are accessibility issues. If the person is disabled and is unable to access the interview venue, that is an offense for that organization. You should have those mechanisms in place so that each individual is able to access the venue and access wherever that opportunity exists. That is the equal opportunity that we've been talking about. So the issue of having affirmative action should be something that needs to be encouraged. And having it in form of legislation, where in UK, for example, there is the Equality Act where this exists, these protected rights exist, which also include age, race, and so on and so forth. Those could also be considered legislative in the Gambia. Not only the quota system, but outside of representative positions, any other position, whoever is doing that recruitment should have that legal backing to be able to implement affirmative action where it is realistic and where it would be helpful.
Right. Wonderful. I think this has been a brilliant discussion for tonight. Jawo provided an extensive analysis of issues that he wants to be considered in the new constitution, ranging from party funding, a thorough consideration for fundamental human rights like right to health, education, and environment, citizenship, issues that dealing with the IEC chairperson, the principle, absolute principle of absolute majority as a democratic principle, issues dealing with chief executives in business and establishment and foundations, alcalos, governors, equality, inclusiveness, and quota discussion. On that note, Jawo, we would like you to give a concluding remark, and then thank you very much for the brilliant analysis for tonight on the DOIS perspective.
Thank you very much, Suleiman. In terms of talking about a constitution, the interest that I've seen in London, I think if that is manifested everywhere, then that would be really very helpful to the CRC and to the Gambian people. For the Gambian people to have a say in terms of that fundamental law, that fundamental instrument, what goes into it. Because, a constitution basically is the legal basis for the existence of a polity, the existence of a country. And it determines how the government is to be constituted, how it is to be established, how the country is to be governed, and the relationship between the state and the citizenry in terms of elections and so on and so forth, and the rights of individuals in that country. And where one rights are being discussed, everyone should have an interest in that. And the interest I saw at the meeting was really good. The contributions, like I indicated, I would not be able to make an evaluation of the value for money, or as others would put it, the value for many, in terms of how many people benefit out of it. Right. But the contributions, the quality was really really, really very good. And I'm sure with the commissioners and the chairperson, I think they would. My belief is that they would come up with a good document, and it would be really good, because I did not capture the date as to the extension of submission of recommendations or views to the CRC, but I understand it has been extended. So if one goes to their website and one wants to make more contributions, because their email address is there, their telephone number, we can make contributions. Important contribution that I found really very useful as well was on the side of IT. One gentleman, I think is a specialist IT, I will put it, make really very good contributions, quality contributions in terms of IT governance in the country. And he was asked to make a submission to the CRC. So in conclusion, I think my view, it was a very good process in terms of the beginning of the conversation, the political situation in the country. Gambian people should not accept to be a pawn of any politician, not accept to be a pawn of any political party. Each one should have his or her independent mind and make decisions based on objective reality in terms of who among those politicians, who among those political parties is better positioned to advance their interests, to advance the interests of their family and their community, to eradicate their poverty. Anything sort of that, Gambian people could reconsider the political position of that politician or that political party.
Wonderful, Jawo. I mean, it's been a brilliant night, and we'll keep bringing you here. I believe the audience have enjoyed this discussion. But again, viewers, this is what we call DOI. We've got the technocrats, people with the intellectual prowess that can detach issues for you, unpack them for you to a basic understanding. Until next time, we thank you very much and have a very good night. Jawo, again, for those of you who are asking who is he is Abdoulie Jawo, a Gambian based in Bradford, but obviously works in London, and an international development expert. Thank you very much, Jawo.
Thank you very much, Suleiman.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye.